Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Full Crew. I'm Don Zoldi, one of your co-hosts.
Hey, and I'm Mike Peel, and we are joined here today with Todd Basile, and we're going to be talking about a couple of cool things, especially in terms of eVTOL AAM announcements. We're also going to be talking about some support for drone inspection infrastructure, which is really important. And then we're also going to be talking about kind of the first big announcement around the CHIPS bill. So stay tuned for that. Just a reminder, if you like what you're seeing, please subscribe, hit the like button, and the notification bell. All right. So, Todd, tell us a little bit about yourself so we can get the show rolling.
Hey Mike, hey Don, thanks for having me today. My name's Todd Basile. I'm a technology attorney with the law firm Greenberg Trard, former Bell helicopter engineer, and I chair our firm's robotics and autonomous technologies group. So if it flies, swims, drives, or operates in a warehouse or anything like that, it falls under our umbrella, and we help out a lot of companies with all sorts of legal issues in those areas.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you. I've known about you since I was chair of Interdrone, and I know you got to speak at that show, but I never got to meet you in person. So, really excited. I know you always got good reviews from the audience. So, we're going to start with your article and um, tell us a little bit about why you thought this was important.
Sure, sure. So, this is about government funding for drone inspections of our nation's infrastructure. And, it's $200 million worth of funding over 2 years. 100 million of it's going to go toward, local and state governments to fund the actual performance of drone inspections and to acquire the equipment they need. And if they don't have the expertise to farm it out, and then the other 100 million is going to go to more of an educational piece, actually, to support universities and other sorts of training programs for training drone pilots and other support roles and things of that nature. So, I think it's a really exciting bill. It passed the House. There's a companion bill pending in the Senate right now. It's expected to pass. With bipartisan support and hopefully get signed by the White House. But it's just exciting anytime we see funds actually flowing into the industry, and just particularly exciting to see sort of it flowing down not just into ops but into training up the workforce as well.
Well, what I was going to say is what's exciting to me is that this thing is bipartisan already, like in the House, because in today's environment, having any issue where both sides lock arms is, I think, a very significant feat. And I think it speaks volumes about the industry and how folks are thinking about it, that they are locking arms on this. So, yeah. And shout out to AUVSI. I know this was in their autonomous blog. They were one of several groups that are advocating for this particular bill. So, yay. I think that's wonderful. And I thought it was interesting, Todd, and I love your thoughts on this too, and Mike's. Just kind of scanning through this bill. And by the way, everybody, it's not a long bill. If you want to look it up yourself, I always tell people, don't just read the article or the blog. Go right to the text, read it for yourself. But what it says is that grant recipients must use domestically manufactured drones that are made by companies not subject to Chinese influence and or control. So again, another significant thing. So now we're talking, as you know, Todd, right? We had the DoD fiscal year 2021, right? The ban that was codified in the law, for the DoD. Recent action by the DoD under what section was it? Section 1260H of that same act, where the DoD has to publish companies that fall under this umbrella, and they just literally in the last week put DJI on that list. So now you're seeing this possibly expanding into law for other sectors beyond the military. So I would love to hear, Mike's thoughts, your thoughts on that.
Well, this is the kind of soft pressure I prefer to see as opposed to outright bans. I think this makes sense because if you absolutely have to use the tool that works and there's no other tool available, then you should be able to consider that. And all right, that means you forfeit this money. So there's a balance there, right? Also, it allows any money into the sector, I think, will help move things forward. It's critical that we get rid of the dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs around inspection. Infrastructure inspection is definitely one of the most dangerous jobs out there that you could possibly imagine. And then also there's just more coverage when you use drones. So this is kind of like a no-brainer in terms of our ability to actually maintain our infrastructure, which everybody refers to as crumbling these days. So if we're ever going to make it so that people just don't throw that word around when describing our nation's infrastructure, we're going to have to repair it and we're going to have to assess it. So any money to that effort is definitely necessary. That's kind of where I'm at on it. And like I said, I'm really kind of more happy to see this than kind of people reactively banning things without research or, cause. This has cause and incentive, and that's what I'd like to see.
Absolutely, Mike. And just to elaborate on your point, I mean, I like the soft pressure too. It's Congress exercising the power of the purse, as they often do. And so, I'm a fan of that approach as well, generally. And I think something else. You mentioned, hey, the dull and dirty work of inspecting and maintaining our infrastructure. Absolutely. I mean, this is a classic use case, very strong use case for drones. But what I also sort of like about it too is, look, these drones are gonna have visibility for the public. Folks are gonna see them being flown around under bridges and alongside other infrastructure, and it's not going to be in that sexy sci-fi futuristic sort of context. It's just going to be out there doing daily work, daily jobs, and I think that actually might be a positive thing for the industry. A lot of folks think of a drone and they think of a toy. Someone's flying around and spying on you in your backyard, but if they see these things out there doing real jobs and having real benefit and not in places where people are terribly concerned about privacy, I think that's a good thing for the industry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I got to mention, we're supposed to have Jason Pritchard here from eVTOL Insights. I know he's really busy with his conference, and so we had to kind of adjust on the fly there. So we have his article and we'll be addressing it, and Mike will be live at the eVTOL Insights conference tomorrow, and we'll be talking to Jason live there in New York City. So stay tuned for that. But we're rocking and rolling today, and with the three of us, and we're going to keep moving on. But this drone infrastructure, and by the way, everybody, we are live right now. So if you have thoughts, comments, please drop them in the chat. We love that. We love to engage with our audience as well.
Yeah, we got one from Bronwyn right now, actually. So this is big for us, and I'm glad it's happening. So
awesome. That's Bronwyn Morgan from Zio Air. She's got like a number of companies, but we love Bronwyn. So thanks for your support, Bronwyn. And everybody's
awesome
really
podcast
excited.
herself, so check out her podcast.
Yeah, the ZioCast. Absolutely. Check out Bronwyn's podcast as well. One thing also, Todd, that I love about this is that DOT must also award grants to certain institutions of higher education for training students for careers, right? So it's not just, kind of generic workforce development training, but very specific to institutions of higher learning, which frankly, in my opinion, we need to start way earlier in life, right? Like we need to be hitting them up in elementary school, like Tony Reed and Drone Cadets and some other groups that are doing amazing stuff out there. But I think that's a great start to be funding some of this, using some of this DOT infrastructure money for colleges for this kind of education.
Right. That's actually how I got into this whole business in the first place as a kid, going to air shows and things of that nature. Let's roll in drones. Let's roll in those sorts of training programs as school progresses and kids age and such. And I think look, all politics is local. I think it's another thing I like about this bill, is it is going to fund those institutions, not just existing ones, but ones that are kind of up and coming or states that actually want to create new programs. I mean, if you look at sort of the sponsors of the bill in the House, it's someone from Arizona. And Dawn, I believe you have some sort of relationship with Embry-Riddle. That's
Yeah.
clearly gonna help them. And then the sponsors for the companion bill in the Senate, you've got Nevada, you've got Arkansas, and you've got Connecticut. I know in Nevada, University of Reno, I believe, has a drone program, and I think some of these other states do as well. So obviously, it's great for their constituents, and what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It's exciting to see those seeds get planted and nurtured early on.
And connecting some of those dots, Todd, you've got the Nevada, you've got a test site out there, you've got Beyond Research in Reno that you just kind of mentioned. Arkansas came out not tied for number 2, by the way, with North Dakota this year in the Mercatus Center's kind of drone friendly, right, index, if you will, the states that have the most drone friendly, essentially laws and environment. Connecticut's interesting to me. That's one, it's almost like Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other. I'm not tracking a ton of drone activity out in Connecticut. I think Aquiline Drones is out there, if I recall correctly. But, that's not a state that jumps out in my mind. But obviously a senator there that thinks like, well, we need to be pulling up on those lists, right, on those indexes there. So interesting.
Yeah, and speaking of indexes, we got another one, right, Don?
Yeah, absolutely. So jumping ahead to our next one, this is one that Jason actually had provided us and an article he authored. So shout out to Jason, and a real bummer he couldn't be with us here right now. But KPMG did an air taxi readiness index for this year, but it really was based on last year, and a lot of interesting developments. So just kind of mention the Mercatus Center. That one was really, if you looked at the criteria matters, right, Todd? What are they measuring here to make these indexes and to rank different companies, or in the case of Mercatus, states? In the case of Mercatus, it was like primarily like drone laws, if you will, almost like the legislative and policy environment in the state. This index measured 5 different things: consumer acceptance, infrastructure, policy and legislation, technology and innovation, and then lastly, business opportunity. And it's something they've been doing for a little bit. And what we saw, and there's 47 different metrics across those categories, if you will. And the bottom line up front, to use the military term we always used to use, is the U.S. came out on top almost across the board. So overall, U.S. is number 1 for advanced air mobility readiness, according to this index, which is huge. And I'll just super quickly roll through kind of where we are. And kind of China number 2, close behind, and then UK number 3, just generically. But let's go with consumer acceptance. It was US, then China, Singapore, then Brazil. And what you see is Brazil popping up on some of these categories. Okay, the next one, infrastructure. We're just talking about drone infrastructure, right? And some support there. Here we're talking AAM infrastructure, US, China, South Korea, United Arab Emirates, and Japan. Policy and legislation, UK number 1. UK number 1, US number 2. So, hey guys, we got to work on that. Technology and innovation, US, China, UK, Japan, and Brazil. So you see Japan and Brazil popping up again. And then last but not least, I think, business opportunity, US, UK, France, Canada, and Germany. So really interesting. I found it to be personally maybe surprising that the U.S. was on the top for almost all of these, with the exception of policy and legislation. Actually was on the top for all of these. I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I was thinking kind of Asia was way ahead of us in many respects when it came to AAM, and also Europe in general, but maybe specific countries there. Todd, what are your thoughts?
I was surprised as well, Don, to be honest with you, especially on the regulatory front. I've always thought of Europe as a little further ahead of us in the adoption on the regulatory front. But the social acceptance piece is interesting to me because privacy and data security are really critical issues over there in Europe with the GDPR and all of that. And so I don't pretend to have the pulse of the European market probably as much as you and Mike do. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's actually somewhat of an impediment to acceptance. Whereas the U.S., we're still pretty piecemeal. Everyone's privacy's on our radar, but it seems to sort of be an afterthought oftentimes to commercial opportunity.
So, Mike, maybe you remember, it was last year there was was it EASA did a survey of European on AAM, and they found like 70% of Europeans were welcoming and excited for AAM.
Yes, there was something to that degree, and it was like surprising, but overall, actually, I'm more surprised that the U.S. is so high on the list than I am that Europe is lagging. But I will say this might just be kind of comparative metrics, because you'll see Singapore there on that list when you like comparative like GDP. It's punching above its weight. Same story for Brazil, right? Punching above its weight. But it just kind of makes sense because there's been testing done in those countries. Those governments were welcome to it, so that can kind of help tip the scale on the other metrics. Where my surprise in the United States, and actually it's probably all of our surprise, is basically due to our understanding of the regulation not being as kind of close to ready for this type of thing, even in terms of testing, right? So I think what you're seeing is countries that have the ability to do test beds are just ranked higher, and the technology is understood and accepted because of that.
I'll tell you one thing that actually wasn't surprising to me was China's jump from number 6 to number 2 in terms of consumer acceptance and infrastructure and tech. I actually work closely with one of my colleagues in our Shanghai office, and she is totally tied into the autonomous vehicles space over there in China, and air taxis obviously have a parallel to that, and she's just saying everything is taking off, and the government's actually taking it seriously, putting regs in place that are conducive to testing and expanding those things, and just hearing her experience over there with her clients and dealing with the government, it does not surprise me whatsoever that China made a jump.
Yeah, it also doesn't surprise me because basically any technology that was invented in the last 25 years, they seem to have been putting an effort behind rather than trying to beat the competition at technologies that already exist. So, or already exist in a mature state, right? That totally makes sense to me that's where they're putting their investment, and they've been pretty intelligent in terms of their force behind tech investments. And their corporate infrastructure is clearly different than the United States and Western countries, so the way that money funnels down is also different.
It'll be interesting to see, and I'd like to hear both of your thoughts on this, if what we're seeing in the drone space vis-a-vis cybersecurity and other kind of espionage and kind of generic security concerns in the drone space vis-a-vis China will bleed over into this electric vertical takeoff and landing arena with China. I'm just thinking, so the concern is connecting with drones in particular. It's like the connection to the internet and where that information ultimately goes. With eVTOL, or advanced air mobility, you're tapping into, I'm not sure what you're tapping into, honestly, because frankly, it hasn't quite been created, has it? Like the UTM system, if you will, how this is going to interface with air traffic control or other very widespread systems. Like, I feel like in a way, I'm just spitballing right now because honestly, I haven't put a lot of thought into it until just now. I feel like that could even be a more significant
Well,
challenge or threat. I'm
no,
not sure.
I would say it's kind of the same, right? So the chips bill, which we'll cover later, is handling kind of the manufacturing side. So there is a base for connectivity technology. There also are other countries that provide connectivity solutions. You might remember the push against Huawei years ago. So that kind
Yeah.
of almost settles the 5G connectivity issue for any eVTOL system. Uh, GPS we've talked about a whole bunch of times. I'll refer you to any episode on our wonderful YouTube channel that
Yes,
we have covered it from
indeed.
multiple angles with multiple experts, and I commend you to look at all of them. But yeah, so in terms of parts, like the big parts, they're being able to source those clearly are commercial airline manufacturers like Boeing, and then also in Europe, Airbus are able to source these parts efficiently without being worried that the Chinese government can possibly take command of the planes. So I would say it's basically, it really all comes down to the transmitter and receivers, how that information is being transmitted, and then it just kind of falls back to the requirements. Like if you're going to be flying this thing in the United States, they could say that it has none of these Chinese components, or else we won't let it get off the ground. I think it's actually easier to control than small drones, which are distributed in mass in a normal commercial environment, right? I think that's the big thing. Like camera store shelves versus vertiports. Which one is easier to keep a lens on? Todd, what's your take?
Hey, Mike, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, frankly, with that. You know, the ability to control and regulate will certainly be far easier, I think, on on the vertiport, you know, on the eVTOL side of things. You know, so I think, and you know, you actually touched on something I probably will hold off on for our talk about the CHIPS Act. But I think, you know, on top of that, look, that you've got the tech piece figured out, absolutely. And then, you know, as we're all probably aware, you know, the implications you mentioned, hey, the taking over of the aircraft, that's obviously a concern. It's a concern they have in the autonomous vehicle space. And, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if there's even stricter rules, depending on what sort of airspace, you know, folks are going to be flying out of, where that vertiport is, where that, you know, final destination is. You know, if you don't have one blanket reg that says no Chinese stuff or whatever, you might start seeing something a little more with a finer point around critical infrastructure and urban centers and military installations and things of that nature.
You know, we are behind clearly, as the index noted, in the United States on policy and legislation. I mean, the last piece of legislation we had, right, Todd, was like that advanced air mobility. What was it? The almost like something like Togetherness Act. I don't. It was like, hey, let's create a working group to talk about this for the next 2 years and give us a report. And I know we talked about it in one of our previous crews, but you know, as we're kind of spitballing this, it makes me wonder, like, are we going to see something like the Blue framework and the Blue UAS kind of equivalent pop up in the AAM space? I mean, the Air Force has been working very closely with a whole host of eVTOL companies through AFWorks, right? Like getting certification for Beta Technologies and Joby, and you're seeing like this. It's really a focus on dual use technology, you know. So, Mike, I agree with you. This is not the same extent because it's not like I'm going to Best Buy and buying an eVTOL off the shelf. But you know, the military is highly interested in this technology, and you know, they're already working with a number of these companies, but you haven't seen these policy things come out yet, at least directly. You haven't seen Congress really weighing in on this. So who knows? More to follow. It will be definitely interesting to watch.
I have the feeling when these things start to approach marketability rather than kind of this startup environment that we're currently in, that you'll start to see those concerns come in rather quickly, right? Because we've learned lessons from the small UAS space that clearly we won't relearn, especially as the DoD is in conversations with Congress and the manufacturers. And there's investment. So I think, I think it'll just kind of be a little bit faster on the eVTOL front than it was on the small UAS front, and more targeted, because we'll know exactly what the requirements will need to be, right? Who can have control
Mike, I'm
of
seeing.
something.
I was gonna say, I'm
we got a
seeing
great comment from Rex. Well, a couple comments. So Robert Johnson, thumbs up. Thanks, Robert. We appreciate it. Rex Alexander, the real test will be how excited these groups will be after they see and hear the product. That is usually when we find that the large group of not in my backyard is appearing. They love the idea as long as it's not near them. And I know, Don, you've brought that up in some articles in terms of sound control. Very, very true. You know, I've often brought up the example of in New York City, helicopter traffic was reduced at one point because of the noise. So it's a different type of noise on these vehicles usually because they're running smaller rotors than a helicopter would be running, but still high pitch frequency still might be annoying. So dampening technology, I think, will actually be key to adoption and scaling. Or else we'll allow them, we just won't allow a lot of them because the people...
I was going to also say, by the way, that was, for those that don't know, that's Rex Alexander with 5 Alpha. Rex is a world-renowned heliport, vertiport, drone port expert. So, yeah, and he's a helicopter pilot, so he knows, like, he's seen the pitchforks come out, and he's testified, you know, as you said, Todd, you know, politics is at the local level. You know, he's testified before zoning boards when someone wants to create like a private heliport and they all come out with their pitchforks. So, you know, Rex knows from personal experience that exactly as long as it's not near or in my backyard should be good to go. So very interesting. And that, Mike, is our next article the one I proposed?
Yeah, but we just got to take a quick break to thank our sponsors. We've got Aiken Gump, which we've got an exciting podcast with them, and Susan Lent, and who from Neuro?
Oh, Greg Rogers
Greg
from
Rogers
Neuro
from Neuro.
AI. They make autonomous ground vehicles, cars and trucks. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's exciting. We got our Aiken Gump podcast coming up on Thursday. Promo Drone, that's Jamar Williams. If you don't know him yet, check him out on LinkedIn. He's doing some amazing work with our friends at a Global Aerial Management Group. Dragonfly, who's been a big supporter from the beginning, and also Elsight, who's been supporting this podcast and Dawn's work for some time now. So we want to thank our sponsors for making this show possible, and we also want to thank you, our audience, for helping our channel grow. Yeah, so let's head up to the next one. So this one's from you too, Dawn. So...
Yeah, you know, this was it's really a great segue from the last to this because we were talking at length about community acceptance. And so this is an article in UAS Vision pushed out, probably a press release from Boeing and Wisk. Wisk is a Boeing subsidiary, I believe. They put out a joint concept of operations for urban air mobility. It's a 64-page document. Pretty easy to read, honestly. Beautiful little, you know, kind of graphics and pictures here. But, you know, one quote right from the top in the preface is, quote, "Community trust and acceptance will be key." And so just kind of acknowledging that up front. What I love about this document, because we've seen other ConOps come out, you know, I think Lilium might have one, a couple of these other OEMs have pushed out their own versions. FAA just put out a vertiport standard in you know, not too recent past. But what this does is almost like take every facet of what you can think about when you think about, you know, electric vertical takeoff landing operations and breaks it down into kind of principles. Like it's almost like this overarching guidance. Like, you know, for example, you know, 3 overarching principles that govern the entire document are UAM must be safe, it must be affordable, and it must be available for everyday flight. You know, things like this. I'm a nerd, so I really got into the fact that they actually use the word corridors. Todd, I know that is a hot button issue for so many people, like when they talk about drones, and here we are with eVTOL talking about flight corridors for UAM, UAM routes, and then we talked, we started off this discussion a little bit on workforce development with that drone infrastructure bill. Literally talk about some new positions that nobody have ever heard of before in this document. Things like a multi-vehicle supervisor and a vertiport manager. So again, like so many different things to peel back in 64 pages of goodness here. I'm going to stop talking, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to think. Let's go with Todd first.
Yeah. So, truth be told, I haven't had a chance to dive into this probably at the level you have done, but some of the takeaways I got from it are, it seems like they're definitely trying to offload things as much as possible from more of the centralized air traffic control sort of structure, which I think makes a lot of sense. Obviously, you need the two talking to one another because you've still got regular, air traffic as well as sort of more of this eVTOL stuff. And I think honestly we're going to see that with drones as well. There's got to be this low altitude, over urban center sort of crosstalk, if you will, which I think is going to come down to the infrastructure. But I could go on for that about that for days. It's good to see folks thinking about this. It seems like it's going to start off like a lot of technologies are, a little more rigid, a little more scheduled. And then like a control system from 10 years ago, and it's gonna sort of build upon itself and learn upon itself and get a little more dynamic as we learn more lessons and go forward. So I'm glad to see that flexibility in there and sort of that recognition of the need to grow into it.
Yeah, Mike, what are your thoughts here?
I'm just kind of surprised it took so long to get here. I know Boeing has been interested in the space for a long time. We honestly need kind of more of these drafts, but you could put together as much as you want in concept. When the rubber meets the road, things will clearly change. And there's a lot of other developments in UTM that are going to have to be necessary for all of this stuff to work, and for the regulators to feel comfortable with it. So sometimes I think back on Amazon's. If you want to sponsor the show, Amazon, please stop listening right now, because I remember years ago they had almost a laughable kind of like breakup of the airspace. It's like, this will be where the drones go, and it was like 3 bars, which was, I mean, it was cute if you were talking to investors, but it was not a fully kind of developed ConOps like this is. So impressed with the quality. One of the things that caught my eye is just literally how distributed it is. So I'm curious again when the rubber meets the road if this is actually going to be as distributed as pictured here, or we might kind of get stopped somewhere along the way.
Well, what I also found interesting about this, and Mike, we've talked about this before on this show with other experts as well. This idea of the companies that are going to succeed are the collaborators. And what jumped out at me as I was reading this was all the room at a really big table for so many enabling technologies. I mean, they're listing off things like not just vertiport systems, right? And I want to talk about that more in a second, but detect and avoid, command and control, cybersecurity. I mean, the list just kind of goes on and on and on. And, one that wasn't in there, which I found interesting too, is because I think it's always one of those afterthoughts, is, physical security and counter drone. Because you need to be able to protect, almost like an airport. We're talking, if it's not using existing airport infrastructure, you're going to need similar counter drone technology at these locations, just like you're going to need at an airport, especially to the extent that you've got a big passenger on and offloading, kind of commercial enterprise going on out of one of these. So that was exciting for me to see, here's the 50 different enabling technologies that need to be a part of this. And Mike, I think you and I talked offline, and Todd, I didn't see you there. Maybe next year I will, because I met, by the way, everybody, I met Todd in Austin, Texas at the PX4 Developer Summit back in June. I was wandering around that Move America conference a couple weeks ago, right, in Austin. And these are all the ground vehicle people, right? Now there was a shout out to marine or sea-based assets. There were none there, and then there was a little bit like air. So you had a handful of OEMs like Over Air and Elroy Air was there. But again, just speaking, they didn't have booths. So the primary focus was ground vehicles. And I'm just telling you, I'm walking around the floor and I'm going up to people like, hey, weather guy, are you talking to Don Bershoff at True Weather? Because you're looking at the ground and you're using all these sensors. Like, we need that holistic picture, right, for low altitude air weather that can also be relevant to the ground. So I guess my point is there are definitely kind of discrete market sectors that aren't thinking kind of like of other markets that their products are relevant to. And as I read this document, I'm like, hello, like so many opportunities to partner here.
Yeah, opportunities to partner, but one of the issues that comes with there being no central authority or central planning mechanism is that a lot of times it doesn't get done, or those negotiation between all these supposed collaborators break down. And my guess is the regulators are going to want something as tight as can be, that just because, let's say, an arrangement with Apple drops off because they're terrible at negotiating, actually, in a multi-collaborative environment, then the whole system falls apart. So, like, you could only have so many breakpoints or points of failure when designing something like this. So what I see in the current kind of model here is too many, actually. So opportunities to collaborate, let's take a more negative angle on it, might be that, hey, we can't develop all this technology internally. We are aware of that, so we will be waiting for these people to present these things to us. And we're willing to pay if you are able to make it. So that might be the kind of underlying message here. The truth is about all this stuff is we need a lot of infrastructure. So at some point the government is going to have to support it, or we will be left behind, regardless of how people feel about it or how cool they think it is.
Well, I love Todd's thoughts because I think it's chicken egg. Mike, what you're raising is, there's a lot of people with lots of technology out there. And again, going back to the index, what we're waiting on are the standards. It's the regulations, it's the policies, it's literally the RTC, our RTCA, the ASTM, the FA, like the actual standards that people can then pivot or build their products to. So yeah.
I'm curious about that too, Dawn, because you look at sort of the autonomous vehicle market, and it almost seemed like go back to your Ubers, even before that, it seems like kind of a let's just go in and break it sort of thing. Let's not wait for the government. There's places that don't have any laws saying we can't do it, so let's go do it. That's one thing when you're just on an X and Y axis on the ground. I think it's a whole other thing when you've got a Z axis and, things flying around that can crash into buildings and fall down on people. So I won't be surprised to see, a push for the government to sort of, establish that foundation and push those standards, as you just said. And I'm curious what it'll end up looking like, because every time I think of this, I don't know if you all have seen the Fifth Element. There's a scene in the beginning, Corbin Dallas, Bruce Willis, right? He's a taxi driver, and these are air taxis, right? You're in New York City, you got cars going up and down, left and right, through everything, and one person takes a wrong turn and the whole thing falls apart, right? Are we going to see sort of Z-axis segmented lanes? Or are we going to see more of a free-for-all? I don't know. I mean, in an urban environment, radar really doesn't work for air traffic management if people are going to be flying below rooftops and such. So to your point about infrastructure, Mike, I think connected networks are going to be critical for this, so that everything is talking to everything at the same time and says, hey, I'm over here and I'm moving this way. I'm over here and I'm moving that way. Let's adjust, and not just, based around the buildings and everything of that nature. So, this one is an infrastructure first sort of thing to me, whereas electronic or EVs are more it's the opposite in some ways to me. Let's prove that the cars can do it and then build out the charging infrastructure. So, it's fun to sort of look at this and compare it and contrast it to some of these other sort of somewhat analogous emerging technologies.
Yeah, I might add some nuance to that and kind of leave people thinking a little bit about it. So there was a recent article in Bloomberg. Um, I think Mark Lewandowski was kind of the primary source, called $100 billion has been wasted on self-driving cars. And I almost chose it for this week because it seemed like something we should be talking about in terms of autonomous vehicles. I think a lot of that waste actually comes from a lack of regulatory direction. Where had, for example, we had set up and said, no, you're only going to be able to use these on highways for delivery purposes at first. We're going to create a special lane for it. That technology would actually probably be further ahead, I would think. And we would already have trucks running that lane. So, it's a give and a take, though. Things like Google Maps wouldn't have been invented if they were, sitting on their hands waiting for specific regulatory guidance on that. They said, I think there's room for us to do this. We're going to do this and see if we get our hands slapped. And they didn't. So, but what you said about the need for infrastructure, I think that Z-axis provides some extra testing room because there's less collisions that are possible if you set up a corridor. That's why I was impressed when they started doing that upstate New York and their commitment to the scale of it, because I think that's critical, is can we do these over miles and among a network and provide a certain level of reliability that we can trust that we could then start testing it in other environments. We got another comment from Rex Alexander, and then we're going to move on to the next article. Ride quality will be a huge factor. Passengers expecting a limo ride who are given a carnival ride won't get back on. OEMs have to pay attention to passenger-friendly flight trajectories. Amazing insight, and I like the kind of color commentary there. Thank you, Rex, for providing that.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
No.
I was just going to say, that kind of goes hand in hand with your noise conversation earlier. Vibrations, I mean, they both come from the same thing. I'm a former aerodynamicist at Bell Helicopter, and, size of that rotor, how fast you're spinning it, how balanced it is, and frankly, what you're doing with it are all going to factor into the voodoo of that noise and of that vibrations. And, I think vibrations go with a roller coaster ride, right? So that's a really great comment by Rex, and I'm interested to see how it drives that technology and how that technology ends up looking different than a lot of the drone technology. I feel like a lot of people just look at a drone, they're like, hey, let me put 16 rotors on this thing because I need more lift, when maybe that's not the right answer. So I'll be very curious to see how those parameters would feed in.
Yeah, what you don't want is walking into your vertiport, everybody gets their barf bag before they get on the on the aircraft. It's just like I wrote. Fun fact, Todd. First of all, huge respect for you and your background, just amazing. I have none of that background. I rode in the back of an L-39 jet and doing barrel rolls, and I'm just telling you, man. Not fun. My little barf bag was empty when I landed. I'll leave it at that. But the two dudes before me, theirs was not. And you do not want to have that horrible feel. Nothing. There's almost no worse feeling in the world than being nauseated. It's horrible.
Yeah, we're
anyway.
Completely unsettled. So yes, and people are not apt to forget that. I had one bad VR experience with a race car, and clearly every other one was fine, but that's the one I remember. Whenever somebody mentions VR, not interested.
Can't do it.
Yeah, so we don't want to create artificial barriers. So yes, I agree with Rex. Put the time in, make the seats comfortable, make the routes comfortable, think about it. All right, so lastly, we're going to be kind of returning to the CHIPS Act, which was a major act that came out this year that's actually funding the production of semiconductors within the United States, putting our money where I forget the phrase at the moment.
Money where your mouth is, buddy.
Mouth is, yes, okay. Didn't want to say it wrong, absolutely. So we got some good stuff. Micron is going to invest $100 billion in upstate New York. Onondaga County, which is actually Syracuse, and
Yep.
New Air, Genius NY, all the great stuff happening at Griffith Airport, same area. So this looks like it's going to be New York's tech bed. They said that years ago. They focused a little bit on drones at the outset, but it seems like they are expanding that. We are looking at production. We are looking at thousands of jobs in upstate New York. And this actually isn't the only thing. I also, at the same time, while researching this a little bit more, looks like the White House, when President Biden was in town, was upstate New York in Poughkeepsie talking about IBM. They have a manufacturing base there. Also some investment from Intel, again, talking thousands of jobs, billions of dollars investing in the region for the chips bill. So I guess the big thing for me is I'm happy to see this money. I think at minimum we should have some domestic infrastructure around semiconductors. But I was also seeing things like we're going to pay a prevailing wage. Well, you kind of have to say that. You're not going to underpay people, right? But a prevailing wage here in the United States is more costly than other countries and competing nations for which this kind of bill is designed to brace us against. So the question is, how much are we going to actually get out of this in terms of product and GDP? Even if it's a small amount, I'm excited, and I think it does help in terms of national defense. Don, you want to take it first this time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so we've talked about chips before, not just on this show, but also on Twitter Spaces. We had an incredible conversation with Chad Sweet from Modal AI about this. So you can check those out too. But semiconductors and these chips, they serve as the brain of modern electronics, just to dumb this down. So, very significant. And why do we care? Kind of getting back to our first conversation and how we talked a little bit about, how a lot of these chips are being made in Taiwan, right? Nancy Pelosi went there for a reason, China, right? And so the idea that our national security is dependent on being somewhat independent in this. We can't rely on other countries to produce this, especially ones ultimately that maybe at the end of the day may not be, friendly with us. So some big kind of headlines out of this, really. This is one of the largest economic development projects in United States history. So that's a foot stomp. Also, obviously, largest investment in manufacturing in New York's history. The mega fab, what they're calling it, will create nearly 50,000 jobs and plus additional thousands in construction. I had to look this up, everybody.
Wasn't there a caveat, though, on that 50,000? Wasn't it 9,000 from the company, but it would be kind of 41,000 in supporting jobs over the next 5 years to build this out?
Yeah, so what you're seeing is kind of this peanut butter spread across a whole bunch of different things, including like $500 million community fund, again, to like develop the workforce and things of this nature. So you're seeing, people very deliberately realizing that it's not just the infrastructure. You need the workers to go along with it. You got to give them reasonable wages. You got to give them the training, the education they need to be doing this. But fun fact, I didn't know what a clean room was. Todd he's laughing because, of course, like all engineers maybe do. So I looked it up. It's going to be the largest clean room in the nation, 2.4 million square feet. What does it mean? It's an enclosed space in which airborne particulates, contaminants, and pollutants are kept within strict limits. In industry, clean rooms are used in the manufacture and servicing of hardware such as integrated circuits and hard drives. That translates to 40 football fields in length. It will be the largest one. So that's pretty, and to be that locked down.
That environment like that.
That right. I don't know. Todd, over to you. You're the engineer. What are your thoughts?
Oh goodness, I'm not in that hardcore double E space, but that's an impressive feat in and of itself. If you imagine it, Don, it almost looks like there's in some of those areas there's folks walking around in hazmat suits. Every little impurity or static discharge or anything can
Yeah.
ruin the manufacture of those things.
Static
There was a
electricity
clean
is one of
room
the
in.
biggest concerns, right?
Right. Yeah. Or Independence Day, if you think of that, when the president, I'm apparently into movies
I
today.
love that. Everything's a movie. No,
Right.
that's awesome.
Yeah, well, when the president first goes down to see the alien that they captured at Area 51, I mean that isn't necessarily a clean room from an electronics manufacturer standpoint, but there's parallels, right? And to do that, and there's actually a lot of supporting infrastructure underneath that goes into it, and pulling out harmful chemicals from the manufacturing process and everything. I mean, it's a phenomenal infrastructure project, and if it's got to be that big to produce that much stuff, I'm not surprised government funding is becoming a big piece of it. And politics, whatever they are, I think the national security aspect, like that you guys touched on, calls for those federal dollars. With everything going on with Russia and Ukraine, and then sort of the parallels of China taking over Taiwan, I mean that's a big deal. Taiwan's number one or one of the biggest
Yeah, we found
chip
out
manufacturers in the world.
60% is coming from Taiwan, and then
Right.
a good percentage is coming from South Korea. Both of these are actually vulnerable if you're just thinking in terms of, geopolitical positioning, where they are in the world. So yeah, that's a big chunk.
Yeah. And I think, just something else that's just kind of personal to me. And Don, you said you're a tech nerd. I think everybody on this call is a tech nerd, right? I do, have a special place in my heart for those revitalization stories as well. Now, I haven't been to Syracuse. I don't know the area, but to my understanding that a lot of manufacturing pulled out of there
Yep.
over the years, it makes me, kind of at least think of Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
and how, they went from steel to, all of a sudden the arts, frankly, but also robotics, and they were one of the first autonomous vehicle test beds, I think, in the
That
U.S.
is a
as well.
perfect
And so
analogy.
think about it that way.
Having been to
Yeah.
both places, that is actually pretty on target. Yeah.
Yeah, so going back to movies, right? All the Right Moves, the steel mill with Tom Cruise way back in the day. And of course, I'll bring it into another genre of music. You've got Billy Joel living here in Allentown, right? So I'm a PA gal, so all those things are near and dear to my heart. But you're absolutely right. There are so many places like Syracuse on the East Coast. I think of Troy, New York, where Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, my son went there. Where there needs to be a revitalization, like that was a huge industrial right along, the river there, and it's all just, it needs some help. But so that's great. I love also they're building sustainability into this in addition to revitalization. They're saying 100% of electricity is going to be from renewable sources for this plant, which is amazing. And also love their prioritizing hiring for disadvantaged communities, for veterans, and a handful of other groups. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, when we first saw the CHIPS Act come down, this is what we were waiting for, right? These are the actual announcements. And I'm happy to see them soon. This is not that long after. It is going to be a long journey, though. So, it's not going to be tomorrow we're going to just have manufacturing upstate.
Right.
These fobs take time. But I think the biggest thing is the understanding from the U.S. government that these things take time and they take money, and they are committing the actual effort to it rather than just paying it lip service and hoping for somebody else to come up with the solution or let the market completely solve itself. So the market actually did completely solve itself. Southeast Asia has the cheapest chips. That is the solution to just the market's question. But there is another question, is what do we do when we are unable to get those things? So I think COVID taught everybody a big lesson in terms of having reserves of critical materials, and then also to not just rely on a purely global world, even if there was no geopolitical concerns. There might actually literally be another virus 10, 20 years from now that makes the transport of goods hard or impossible. And having other places where you could actually draw these critical technologies from is going to be important. The next kind of outlook, once we establish stuff on the home front here, I want to see what other partners we could find that are allies that can actually also work with us to create more resilient networks so that we're not the only people producing these things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think I'm seeing a comment or two. I'm not sure there in the chat.
No, we're all well, yeah, actually, we got two from Tony. Sorry, I responded to her in the chat. So, good chat on the index. What we see and hear in the field varies from this index. So, basically, her level of surprise is kind of matching ours. And then CUAS is almost never discussed in this ecosystem. So I thanked her. I said, that's so true, Tony. Because honestly, Dawn, until you said it, it was the first time I ever heard it. And I was kind of surprised I hadn't thought about it, considering in every other scenario that I've had discussions about it. So it's certainly going to be critical for eVTOL's UAM.
Well, when you think of security, right? It's got to be multi-layered, and there's different facets to security. There's cybersecurity, which is now just getting some visibility and actually mentioned in that WIS ConOps. Finally somebody's talking about it. But then also physical security and what does that look like? And is it just physical barriers like you see after 9/11, all those concrete things or little planters that popped up around the government buildings that aren't planters, they're actually barriers. So yeah, lots of things that need to be considered as we think about this. But it looks like we're getting close to the end of our time here, Mike, already.
Yeah, so we just want to thank our sponsors again, Akin Gump, Dragonfly, L-Site, and Promo Drone for their support. We also want to thank the audience for tuning in today and remind everybody, if you liked what you heard at any point, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and sign up for notifications. You could also go to fullcrew.io and sign up to our newsletter. We just inform you about the episodes right before they're about to go live, and you'll never miss an episode if you sign up. Other than that, we got some great stuff coming up this week, and I'll start with I'm going to be at eVTOL Insights in New York tomorrow. Probably talking with Jason Pritchard, making up for the loss today. We got some great stuff coming up on Dawn of Drones. I know we got Troy Hiddle on Wednesday. And Dawn, you want to take us from Thursday onward?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I want to thank Todd for being here, for being such a great sport, kind of stepping up to the plate when we lost one of our guests today. But great job, Todd. And by the way, everybody, really looking forward to working with Todd more in the future. Stay tuned, everybody, for the Law Tech Connect workshops in 2023, including one at AUVSI Exponential and one at the Energy Drone and Robotics Coalition Summit. We're definitely looking to get Todd involved in those, and you can see the level of expertise he brings to the table, so it'll be a great addition to our faculty. But getting back to tomorrow, Wednesday, Troy Hiddle on the Dawn of Drones, Elastair Drones, a tether solution. So I was in the air, I was literally in my Tesla, Mike. You'll appreciate this since this is technology podcast. I'm in my Tesla on the way back from Denver International Airport. I could see everybody, but I could not talk or engage in Clubhouse. So shout out to Maggie Schuster for guiding that conversation with Troy. It was an amazing conversation. Maggie's a pilot and just brings a whole different perspective to that conversation. So really rich and valuable conversation. Check out that link and listen to that on replay. But Troy will be on there, and we'll see him live Wednesday. And then this Thursday on Clubhouse, I should be able to dial in, no problems, with Bill Topigan. He is the CEO of Aura. Now, you're thinking, what is Aura? On the Dawn of Drones and Clubhouse, it's Industry Enablers Month, and Aura is creating a unique, secure, private aviation network with command and control and ATC voice capabilities. So they're looking at drones, they're looking at VTOL, their whole entire spectrum. They already have some really cool FCC approvals, and they're already dotted all over the country. So when you think about these enabling technologies, dial in, listen to Bill, and he'll be on the Dawn of Drones next week. So.
All right, great. Just one last comment from Chris Wedgeworth. Peace out. So we're out
Peace
here.
Out, Chris.